What makes people say yes? Is it appealing to their kindness and compassion? Or is there a more powerful force that drives human decisions? Today's story takes us to medieval Paris. In the shadow of Notre Dame Cathedral, we will witness how a desperate young court clerk discovered that mercy and gratitude are weak motivators, when his survival depended on understanding what truly moves people to action. With a lesson he learned from his own failed appeals, he would develop a strategy that transforms rejection into eager cooperation. This story will reveal the most practical secret of human persuasion, a secret discovered 600 years ago, but still used by the most successful negotiators and leaders in today's world. It is not those who appeal to people's hearts who get what they need, but those who speak directly to their interests and show them exactly how helping becomes their own advantage. In the shadow of the great cathedral of Notre Dame, where medieval Paris sprawled along the Seine like a tapestry of ambition and desperation, there lived a truth more valuable than all the silver in the royal treasury. In a world where everyone claims to value mercy and gratitude, the one who understands that people truly respond only to their own interests becomes the master of every request. For when nobles and merchants, clerics and craftsmen all profess devotion to Christian charity while guarding their resources jealously, the wise learn to speak not to their hearts, but to their calculations. The year was 1356, and France was reeling from the devastating defeat at Poitiers, where King John II had been captured by the English, and the entire structure of French nobility had been shaken to its foundations. In this world of political chaos and economic uncertainty, a young court clerk named Étienne de Montpelier faced a crisis that would test not only his survival instincts, but his understanding of how human nature actually operates beneath its noble pretensions. At 26, Étienne possessed the administrative skills that had secured him a position in the royal bureaucracy. But the king's capture had left the entire governmental structure in turmoil. Salaries went unpaid, positions were eliminated, and young clerks like Étienne found themselves suddenly expendable in a system that was fighting for its very survival. With winter approaching and his modest savings nearly exhausted, Étienne needed help desperately. But his initial attempts to secure it had revealed something troubling about the gap between what people claimed to value and what actually motivated their actions. Étienne's first instinct had been to approach potential benefactors through appeals to their stated values of Christian charity and noble obligation. He crafted carefully worded letters describing his dire circumstances, his loyal service to the crown, and his gratitude for any assistance that might be provided. He reminded wealthy nobles of their religious duty to help those in need and appealed to their sense of honor as defenders of royal servants who had been displaced through no fault of their own. The response was politely devastating. Nobles who gave generously to the church and spoke eloquently about their charitable obligations somehow found reasons why Étienne's particular situation didn't warrant their assistance. Merchants who professed gratitude for royal protection of their trade routes were suddenly concerned about their own uncertain prospects. Even fellow clerks who had benefited from Étienne's help in the past discovered pressing obligations that prevented them from returning the favor. The failure of these appeals forced Étienne to confront an uncomfortable reality. People's actual behavior bore little resemblance to their stated values, and successful requests for help had to be based on what people actually wanted, rather than what they claimed to believe. This insight led him to study the few successful requests he had witnessed, trying to understand what had made them effective when his own appeals had failed so completely. What Étienne discovered was that every successful request for assistance had one thing in common. It had been structured to serve the interests of the person being asked, not just the needs of the person asking. The most effective supplicants didn't emphasize their desperation or appeal to abstract virtues. They demonstrated how helping them would benefit their benefactors in concrete, measurable ways. This understanding transformed Étienne's approach entirely. Instead of seeking charity from wealthy nobles, he began to position himself as someone who could provide valuable services in exchange for support. Instead of appealing to merchants' generosity, he identified ways that his skills and connections could enhance their business operations. Instead of asking fellow clerks for favors based on past friendship, he offered to help them advance their own careers through arrangements that would be mutually beneficial. The transformation in response was immediate and dramatic. The same people who had politely declined his appeals for charity became eager to discuss arrangements that served their interests. Nobles who had been unmoved by descriptions of his hardship were suddenly attentive when he explained how his administrative expertise could help them navigate the complex bureaucracy of the Regency government that was struggling to function in the king's absence. Étienne's breakthrough came when he approached Baron Henri de Roussy, one of the wealthiest landowners in the region surrounding Paris, with a proposal that perfectly demonstrated his new understanding of human motivation. Instead of asking the Baron for financial assistance during his period of unemployment, Étienne offered to help the Baron solve a problem that was costing him significant money and creating considerable frustration. The Baron's extensive landholdings generated substantial income, but the complex system of feudal obligations, royal taxes, and church tithes meant that determining his actual tax liability required expertise in administrative law that he didn't possess. Previous attempts to hire legal scholars to resolve these issues had been expensive and unsatisfactory, leaving the Baron overpaying some obligations while inadvertently underpaying others in ways that created legal vulnerabilities. Étienne proposed to conduct a comprehensive review of the Baron's obligations and create a systematic approach to tax management that would save money while ensuring legal compliance. The arrangement would provide Étienne with steady income and housing on the Baron's estates, while giving the Baron access to exactly the kind of administrative expertise he needed. Most importantly, Étienne structured the proposal to emphasize the Baron's benefits rather than his own needs. The Baron's response was enthusiastic and immediate. Here was a solution to a genuine problem that had been costing him both money and peace of mind. Presented by someone whose court experience made him uniquely qualified to provide the needed expertise. The arrangement began within days, and within weeks, Étienne had identified tax savings that exceeded his annual compensation by a substantial margin. But Étienne's success with Baron de Roussy was just the beginning of a systematic campaign to rebuild his position through proposals that served others' interests rather than appeals to their generosity. Each successful arrangement created opportunities for additional relationships, as satisfied beneficiaries recommended Étienne to their own associates and business partners. When Étienne learned that several merchants were struggling with customs regulations that were hampering their trade with Flemish cities, he didn't offer his services as someone who needed work. He positioned himself as someone who could solve their regulatory problems while building his own consulting practice. When he discovered that church officials were having difficulty managing the complex financial arrangements involved in funding cathedral construction, he proposed accounting systems that would serve their needs while establishing his reputation in ecclesiastical circles. The pattern was always the same. Identify genuine problems that people needed to solve, demonstrate how his skills and connections could address those problems effectively, and structure arrangements that made helping him the optimal way for others to serve their own interests. People who would never have responded to appeals for charity became eager partners in arrangements that served their practical needs. More importantly, these relationships were far more stable and sustainable than simple charity would have been. When people helped Étienne because it served their interests, they had strong incentives to continue and expand the relationship. When people might have helped him out of charity, they would have had every incentive to minimize and eventually eliminate their assistance once they felt they had fulfilled their moral obligations. Étienne's transformation from desperate supplicant to valuable service provider reached its peak when he was approached by representatives of the Dauphin Charles, who was struggling to manage the kingdom's affairs during his father's captivity. The Regency government faced enormous challenges in maintaining royal authority while dealing with English military pressure, noble rebellions, and severe financial constraints. Traditional approaches to these problems had failed because they relied on appeals to loyalty and duty that proved inadequate when nobles and merchants faced their own survival pressures. The Dauphin's advisors had sent emissaries throughout France asking for financial support and military assistance based on patriotic obligation and feudal loyalty. But the response had been disappointing because people were primarily concerned with protecting their own interests rather than serving abstract ideals. Étienne proposed a completely different approach based on his understanding of how effective requests actually worked. Instead of asking for sacrifice in service of royal authority, he suggested creating arrangements where supporting the Regency government served people's immediate practical interests. Instead of appealing to abstract loyalty, he recommended demonstrating concrete benefits that would make cooperation profitable for potential allies. The strategy involved restructuring tax policies to provide immediate benefits for regions that supported the Regency, offering trade advantages to merchants who provided financial backing, and creating military arrangements that enhanced local security while serving broader strategic objectives. Each element was designed to make supporting the Dauphin the best way for people to serve their own interests rather than a sacrifice made for the good of the realm. The results exceeded even Étienne's expectations. Nobles who had been unresponsive to appeals for feudal loyalty became enthusiastic supporters when they understood how royal policies could enhance their own wealth and security. Merchants who had been reluctant to provide financial backing became eager investors when they saw how royal trade policies could expand their commercial opportunities. Regional officials who had been passive in their support became active allies when they realized how cooperation with the Regency could advance their own career prospects. Within months, the Dauphin's position had been transformed from precarious to secure, not through appeals to higher virtues, but through systematic alignment of royal policy with the practical interests of key constituencies. The approach was so successful that it became the foundation for the administrative reforms that would eventually enable Charles to reclaim his father's kingdom and establish one of the strongest royal governments in French history. Étienne's role in this transformation was recognized through his appointment to increasingly important positions in the royal administration. But more significantly, he had developed a systematic understanding of human motivation that made him extraordinarily effective in any situation where he needed cooperation, support, or assistance from others. The key insight that guided all of Étienne's successful relationships was that people's stated values and actual motivations operated according to entirely different principles. While everyone claimed to value charity, honor, loyalty, and gratitude, their behavior was actually driven by much more practical considerations related to their immediate interests, long-term security, and competitive advantage. Years later, when Étienne had become one of the most influential advisors in the French court and his methods had helped restore royal authority throughout the kingdom, he would reflect on the counterintuitive principles that had transformed his understanding of human relations. The most important lesson he had learned was that effective requests for help required deep understanding of what other people actually wanted rather than what they claimed to value. Charity, Étienne would observe in his private reflections, is what people praise in theory but avoid in practice. Interest is what people pursue in practice but rarely acknowledge in theory. The wise understand that successful relationships must be based on what people actually do rather than what they say they believe. This philosophy had proven effective not just in times of personal crisis, but as a general approach to building influence and achieving objectives in any complex social environment. Étienne had discovered that when you could demonstrate how helping you served other people's interests, you transformed from a burden they might assist out of obligation into an asset they wanted to cultivate for their own benefit. The approach created relationships that were both more reliable and more productive than traditional forms of charity or favor-seeking. When people helped you because it served their interests, they had strong incentives to ensure that their help was effective and to continue providing support over time. When people helped you out of charity or gratitude, they often provided minimal assistance and looked for opportunities to reduce their commitment. The long-term impact of Étienne's approach extended far beyond his personal success to influence the evolution of French administrative culture and diplomatic practice. His understanding that successful requests must serve recipients' interests rather than merely appeal to their virtues became embedded in how the French court managed relationships with foreign governments, domestic constituencies, and individual nobles. The diplomatic protocols that emerged from Étienne's methods emphasized mutual benefit rather than moral obligation as the foundation for international agreements. Trade policies were structured to demonstrate how supporting French interests served the practical needs of foreign merchants and governments. Military alliances were built around shared strategic advantages rather than abstract commitments to mutual defense. This approach proved remarkably durable and effective, creating a system of relationships that survived changes in leadership, shifts in political circumstances, and the inevitable conflicts of interest that arose in complex international relationships. Because the relationships were based on genuine mutual benefit rather than charitable obligation or emotional gratitude, they remained strong even when circumstances changed in ways that might have undermined arrangements based on softer foundations. But perhaps most importantly, Étienne's methods demonstrated that understanding human nature realistically, rather than idealistically, was essential for anyone who wanted to build effective relationships or achieve significant objectives in competitive environments. People who based their strategies on how they wished people would behave consistently failed when competing against those who understood how people actually behaved. The sophistication of Étienne's psychological insights became apparent when other court officials attempted to copy his methods without understanding their deeper foundations. These imitators often focused on the tactical aspects of his approach, offering services in exchange for support, structuring requests around recipients' benefits, while missing the strategic understanding that made these tactics actually work. Successful application of Étienne's methods required genuine ability to identify and serve other people's real interests, not just superficial attempts to disguise selfish requests as mutual benefit. It required deep understanding of what people actually wanted rather than what they said they wanted, and the ability to create arrangements that truly served everyone's interests rather than merely appearing to do so. Most importantly, it required the psychological maturity to abandon idealistic assumptions about human motivation in favor of realistic understanding of what actually drove people's decisions. This was often the most difficult aspect for others to master, because it required acknowledging uncomfortable truths about human nature that conflicted with the noble ideals that most people preferred to believe. When young courtiers would ask Étienne about the secret of his remarkable success in building relationships and securing support from even the most difficult and self-interested people, he would tell them that the key was understanding the difference between what people should want and what they actually wanted, and then structuring your requests around reality rather than idealism. In our modern world of complex organizations and competing interests, this medieval wisdom has never been more relevant or more powerful. We live in an age where people are constantly making requests for support, assistance, and cooperation. But most of these requests fail because they are based on idealistic assumptions about human motivation, rather than realistic understanding of what actually influences people's decisions. The most successful entrepreneurs, leaders, and professionals of our time are those who have learned to apply the same principles that guided Étienne over 6 centuries ago. They understand that effective requests must demonstrate clear benefits for the people being asked, rather than appealing to abstract virtues or expecting gratitude for past favors. This doesn't mean being cynical about human nature or assuming that people are purely selfish, but rather recognizing that even generous and principled people make their decisions primarily based on their own interests, concerns, and objectives. The most effective approach to building relationships and securing cooperation is to align your needs with other people's interests rather than expecting them to sacrifice their interests for your needs. Whether you're seeking investment for a business venture, asking for support for a charitable cause, building coalitions for political change, or simply trying to advance your career within an organization, the principles of interest-based persuasion remain as powerful today as they were in medieval France. Focus on what you can offer rather than what you need. Demonstrate concrete benefits rather than appealing to abstract values. And remember that sustainable relationships must serve everyone's interests rather than depending on one-sided charity or obligation. For in the shadow of Notre Dame Cathedral, Étienne de Montpelier learned that the greatest power in human relationships comes not from appealing to people's better angels, but from understanding and serving their practical needs and genuine interests. And in that understanding lies a timeless secret of influence. When helping you becomes the best way for others to help themselves, you transform from someone who needs assistance into someone whose success serves everyone's benefit. The most sustainable and powerful relationships are those built on genuine mutual advantage rather than charity, gratitude, or moral obligation. When you can make your success serve other people's interests, you create partnerships that strengthen over time rather than dependencies that weaken as circumstances change.